My daughter-in-law made me sleep in the garage like some stray dog, so I called the bank about their mortgage. What she didn't know was that this old Marine had one final mission left in her, and it was about to change everything. Some battles. You fight for your country, others you fight for your dignity. The October rain drummed against the garage door as I lay on that thin camping mattress, staring at the oil stains on the concrete ceiling above me. 58 years old, 22 years of military service, and here I was being treated like unwanted baggage in a house I helped buy. The musty smell of motor oil and old paint cans filled my nostrils, mixing with the dampness that seeped through the walls. My back ached from the unforgiving surface beneath me, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the humiliation burning in my chest. 6 months ago, when Marcus called me with excitement in his voice, telling me about the perfect house he and Brianna had found in suburban Denver, I thought I was helping my son achieve the American dream. The Victorian-style home on Maple Street had everything they wanted: 3 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, and a backyard where my granddaughter Sophie could play. The asking price was $485,000, and they were $60,000 short for the down payment. Without hesitation, I liquidated my retirement investments, cashed in bonds I'd been saving for decades, and wired them the money. What mother wouldn't want to see her only child succeed? Marcus had served 2 tours in Afghanistan as an Army medic before coming home to study physical therapy. I was proud of him for using his GI Bill benefits wisely, for building something meaningful after his service. When he married Brianna 3 years ago, I welcomed her with open arms. She was studying to become a nurse practitioner, ambitious and driven. I thought we'd be a family united by service and sacrifice. I was wrong. The first signs of trouble appeared during their housewarming party. Brianna barely acknowledged my presence as I helped serve food to their guests. When someone asked about the beautiful hardwood floors, she gushed about how they'd saved for years to afford such quality. Not a single word about my contribution. When I mentioned that I'd helped them get started, Brianna's smile tightened, and she quickly changed the subject to their future renovation plans. I told myself it was just nerves. New homeowners often feel overwhelmed. But as months passed, the pattern became clear. Every monthly mortgage payment of $2,800 included an additional $400 from my checking account. I'd set up the automatic transfer without them even asking, wanting to ease their financial burden as they established their careers. Marcus was working at a rehabilitation center while finishing his graduate program, and Brianna was completing her clinical rotations. I convinced myself I was investing in their future, in Sophie's future. The invitation to stay for an extended visit came in late September. Marcus called, his voice warm with genuine affection. "Mom, we'd love to have you stay with us for a while. Sophie keeps asking when Grandma Kay is coming to visit, and honestly, we could use your help around the house. Brianna's been swamped with her final semester." I packed my bags with excitement, looking forward to spending quality time with my 7-year-old granddaughter and being useful to my family. The drive from my small apartment in Colorado Springs to their Denver suburb filled me with anticipation. I imagined cozy evenings reading to Sophie, helping with dinner preparations, maybe even sharing some of my military stories with my son. I'd brought homemade cookies, Sophie's favorite books, and a genuine desire to contribute to their household. The first week went smoothly enough. I cooked breakfast every morning, helped Sophie with her homework, and kept the house tidy while Marcus and Brianna were at work. Sophie delighted in showing me her drawings and practicing her piano lessons for my appreciative audience. We had tea parties in the backyard and built elaborate blanket forts in the living room. For brief moments, I felt like I belonged somewhere, again. But Brianna's demeanor grew increasingly cold. She made pointed comments about privacy and space, suggesting that unexpected guests could disrupt their carefully planned routines. When I offered to help with grocery shopping or household tasks, she'd decline with a tight smile, claiming she preferred to handle things her way. The guest bedroom I'd been using suddenly needed to be converted into Brianna's study space for her final exams. "Catherine," she said one evening, using my full name instead of the casual K that everyone else called me. "I hope you understand that we need to prioritize my education right now. This certification program is crucial for my career advancement." I nodded, assuming I'd be moving to the living room couch temporarily. That's when she delivered the blow that still echoed in my mind as I lay shivering in the garage. "Actually, we've set up a comfortable space for you in the garage. Marcus installed a space heater and there's an air mattress. It's quite cozy, really, and you'll have complete privacy. Plus, you won't have to worry about disturbing anyone with your early morning routine." My early morning routine. As if my habit of waking at 0600 hours, a discipline ingrained by 2 decades of military service, was somehow an inconvenience to be managed rather than respected. Marcus stood behind his wife, nodding agreement, though I caught something uncomfortable in his eyes. He didn't meet my gaze as Brianna explained how this arrangement would be temporary and practical for everyone involved. The garage had indeed been cleared of some clutter. A small space heater hummed in the corner, and someone had swept the concrete floor. But it was still a garage. Cold, unwelcoming, and utterly inappropriate for a house guest, especially one who had contributed significantly to the mortgage on the very roof over their heads. The camping mattress they'd provided was thin and uncomfortable, the kind designed for weekend adventures, not extended sleeping arrangements. That first night, in the garage, I lay awake listening to the sounds of normal family life drifting through the thin walls. I could hear the television in the living room, Sophie's bath time routine, the comfortable murmur of bedtime conversations. I was physically present in their home but completely excluded from their daily rhythms. The message was clear. I was tolerated, not welcomed. Days blended into a degrading routine. I'd wake at dawn, quietly gather my toiletries, and sneak into the house to use the bathroom and shower before anyone else was awake. Breakfast was eaten alone in the kitchen while the family slept in. I'd spend the day helping with Sophie when permitted, running errands or sitting quietly in local coffee shops to stay out of Brianna's way. Evenings meant retreating to the garage early, giving the family their space for dinner and relaxation. The worst part wasn't the physical discomfort or even the social isolation. It was the gradual erosion of my sense of worth and belonging. I began to question whether I was being oversensitive, whether this arrangement really was reasonable given their space constraints. Maybe military standards of courtesy and respect were unrealistic in civilian family dynamics. Maybe I was asking too much, expecting too much. Brianna had a talent for making her requests sound reasonable, her criticisms constructive. When she mentioned that my presence during dinner conversations seemed to make Sophie overstimulated, I started eating earlier or later to avoid family mealtimes. When she suggested that my offers to help with household tasks created confusion about responsibilities, I stopped volunteering assistance. Gradually, I became a ghost in my own son's home, present but invisible, contributing but unacknowledged. The breaking point came during Sophie's school play rehearsal. I'd been looking forward to attending, having listened to her practice her lines for weeks. She was playing a pioneer girl in their westward expansion production, and her excitement was infectious. The night before the performance, Brianna approached me with that familiar tight smile. "Catherine, I hope you don't mind, but we've decided to keep the audience small for Sophie's performance, just immediate family. You understand how these things can get overwhelming for children. Immediate family." The words hit like a physical blow. I was Sophie's grandmother, Marcus's mother, but somehow I didn't qualify as immediate family in my daughter-in-law's definition. I nodded silently, unable to trust my voice to remain steady. That night, lying on the camping mattress with rain pattering on the garage roof, I felt smaller and more insignificant than I had since my darkest days in basic training 36 years ago. The military had taught me about honor, duty, and sacrifice. It had also taught me about recognizing when a position was untenable, when strategic withdrawal was necessary for survival. As the rain continued its steady rhythm above me, I began to understand that this situation wasn't going to improve through patience or accommodation. This wasn't a temporary arrangement or a misunderstanding to be resolved through better communication. This was systematic diminishment, a deliberate campaign to make me feel unwelcome and unimportant. Whether conscious or unconscious on Brianna's part, the effect was the same. I was being erased from my son's family life, relegated to the margins, while continuing to financially support the very lifestyle that excluded me. In the darkness of that garage, surrounded by lawnmowers and holiday decorations, something inside me began to shift. The compliant, accommodating mother who had absorbed every slight and rationalized every indignity was giving way to something harder, more familiar. The Marine who had earned her place through grit and determination, who had never backed down from a challenge or accepted disrespect without consequence. I thought about my bank account, about the automatic transfers that flowed monthly to support their mortgage. I thought about my retirement funds, liquidated to provide their down payment. I thought about the respect and dignity I'd earned through decades of service to my country, now trampled underfoot by someone who treated me like an unwelcome charity case. The rain continued to fall, but inside that cold garage, a different kind of storm was brewing. One that would soon remind my family that this old Marine still had fight left in her, and that respect isn't just given, it's demanded. The next morning arrived with the crisp bite of early November air seeping through the garage walls. I rolled off the camping mattress at precisely 05:30 hours, muscle memory from decades of military service overriding the exhaustion that had settled deep in my bones. My lower back screamed in protest as I stood, reminding me that concrete floors and thin air mattresses weren't designed for women approaching 60 who'd already sacrificed their bodies in service to their country. I gathered my toiletries quietly, the same ritual I'd performed every morning for the past 3 weeks. The house was still dark and silent as I slipped through the side door, my footsteps carefully measured to avoid the creaky floorboard near the kitchen entrance. The familiar shame of this routine settled over me like a heavy blanket, sneaking through my son's house like an intruder, using their bathroom like a privilege rather than a right. By 6:30, I had coffee brewing and was reviewing the household schedule Brianna had left on the refrigerator. Today's agenda included grocery shopping, picking up Sophie's costumes from the dry cleaner, and preparing dinner before Marcus returned from his clinical rotation. The list was written in Brianna's precise handwriting, each task clearly defined, with specific instructions about brands, timing, and expectations. At the bottom, a note. Catherine, please remember to stay quiet during my study hours, 2 to 5 p.m. Final exams next week. I stared at that note, feeling the familiar mixture of hurt and confusion that had become my constant companion. When had I become someone whose presence needed to be managed and minimized? When had my contributions shifted from welcomed help to tolerated inconvenience? The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I stood in a kitchen I'd helped purchase, following instructions from someone who treated me like hired help rather than family. Every month, $400 flowed from my account to theirs, supplementing their mortgage payment without fanfare or acknowledgement. Every month, I made it possible for them to maintain this comfortable suburban lifestyle while I slept in their garage like some vagrant they'd taken pity on. Sophie bounded into the kitchen at 7 sharp, her honey-colored curls wild from sleep, and her school uniform only half-buttoned. "Grandma Kay, did you make pancakes?" Her bright smile was the only genuine warmth I'd felt in weeks. I knelt down to help with her buttons, inhaling the sweet scent of her strawberry shampoo. "Not today, sweetheart. Your mom left specific instructions. About breakfast. How about we make some oatmeal with cinnamon just the way you like it?" "But I don't want oatmeal," Sophie pouted, her lower lip jutting out in that universal expression of 7-year-old defiance. I want pancakes like you made last week. Those were the best pancakes ever. Before I could respond, Brianna appeared. In the doorway, already dressed in her clinical scrubs with her hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her eyes swept the kitchen, taking inventory of every detail as if searching for infractions. Sophie, you know the rules about breakfast on school days. Oatmeal provides sustained energy for learning. She turned to me with that brittle smile I'd come to recognize and dread. Catherine, I noticed you were up quite early again. The garage walls are thinner than we thought, and your morning routine is disturbing our sleep. Perhaps you could adjust your schedule to be more considerate of the household. The criticism hit like a slap. My morning routine, the discipline, that had sustained me through boot camp, deployment, and civilian transition, was now a problem to be solved. I nodded silently, swallowing the words that wanted to escape. Words about respect, about gratitude, about the contributions I'd made that allowed her to sleep comfortably in her warm bedroom instead of on a garage floor. Marcus emerged from the hallway, adjusting his tie with one hand while scrolling through, his phone with the other. He kissed Brianna's cheek automatically, ruffled Sophie's hair, and grabbed a travel mug of coffee without making eye contact with me. The casual dismissal stung more than his wife's open hostility. At least Brianna acknowledged my existence, even if it was to criticize. Marcus had perfected the art of looking through me as if I were furniture. Don't forget about the parent-teacher conference Thursday, Brianna reminded him as she packed Sophie's lunch with military precision. And your mother mentioned wanting to attend Sophie's school play, but I think it's best if we keep it small. You know how overwhelming these events can become. My breath caught. I hadn't mentioned wanting to attend. I'd simply asked when it was scheduled, showing grandmotherly interest in Sophie's activities. But somehow my innocent question had been transformed into an unwelcome intrusion that needed to be deflected. Marcus nodded absently, still focused on his phone. Makes sense. Mom understands these things. Right, Mom? He finally looked at me, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of the boy who used to run to me for comfort when he skinned his knees or had nightmares. But it passed quickly, replaced by the practiced expression of a man who'd learned to keep peace in his household by going, along with his wife's decisions. I forced a smile and nodded. Of course, whatever's best for Sophie. After they left for work and school, the house settled into an oppressive quiet. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, tidying spaces that were already clean, organizing belongings that weren't mine. The grocery list lay on the counter, a collection of expensive organic items and specialty products that would strain most budgets, but not theirs, not when someone else was helping foot the bills. At the supermarket, I found myself calculating costs automatically, a habit ingrained from years of military budgeting and civilian thrift. The imported olive oil Brianna specified cost more than I typically spent on groceries for a week. The organic produce, free-range chicken, and artisanal bread added up to a cart total that made my chest tighten with anxiety. These weren't necessities. They were luxuries funded by my contributions to their lifestyle. Standing in the checkout line, surrounded by other shoppers going about their normal routines, I felt the weight of my situation settle over me like fog. Here I was, a decorated Marine veteran, using my own money to buy groceries for people who made me sleep in their garage. The absurdity was staggering, but more troubling was how gradually I'd accepted this treatment as normal. The afternoon brought Brianna's designated study hours, which meant I retreated to a local library to avoid disturbing her concentration. I sat in the periodical section, surrounded by newspapers and magazines, trying to lose myself in current events. But my mind kept drifting to the automatic bank transfer scheduled for next week, another $400 flowing from my dwindling savings, to their mortgage account. When had helping become enabling? When had generosity become exploitation? The questions churned in my mind as I pretended to read articles about distant conflicts and political developments. Around me, other library patrons went about their business, students researching, Papers, retirees browsing book selections, parents helping children with homework, normal people living normal lives, none of them exiled from their own family's daily routines. By evening, the household had returned to its familiar rhythm. Marcus came home tired from his clinical rotation. Brianna arrived stressed from her final semester demands, and Sophie bounced between homework and dinner preparations. I moved through this domestic ballet like a supporting player, present but peripheral, helpful but invisible. Dinner conversation flowed around me without including me. They discussed Sophie's upcoming school projects, Marcus's job prospects after graduation, and Brianna's plans for her nurse practitioner certification. I listened from my position at the table, offering occasional smiles and nods when addressed, directly but mostly serving as a silent audience to their family discussions. When Sophie mentioned her excitement about the school play, Brianna smoothly redirected the conversation. "We're trying to keep expectations manageable, sweetheart. Too much excitement can lead to disappointment." The subtle dig wasn't lost on me. My presence at Sophie's performance would somehow create too much excitement, as if a grandmother's attendance was a burden rather than a blessing. I excused myself early, claiming fatigue, and retreated to the garage before dessert was served. Lying on that unforgiving mattress, I listened to the sounds of normal family life through the thin walls. Sophie's bath time splashing, the murmur of bedtime stories, the comfortable domestic rhythms of people who belonged together. The irony was sharp and cutting. I was supporting their lifestyle financially while being excluded from it emotionally. My phone buzzed with a text from my old Marine buddy, Janet, checking in from her retirement in Arizona. "How's the family visit going, Kay? Hope you're having a great time with the granddaughter?" I stared at the message for a long time, unable to formulate a response that wouldn't sound like self-pity or complaint. How could I explain that the family visit involved sleeping in a garage and tiptoeing around my own contributions to their household? How could I describe the systematic erosion of my dignity without sounding bitter or ungrateful? Instead, I typed back, "Good to spend time with Sophie. Hope you're enjoying the desert sunshine." The lie came easily, a protective reflex I'd developed to shield others from uncomfortable truths. But lying there in the darkness, surrounded by lawn equipment and holiday decorations, I began to question why I was protecting people who showed me no similar consideration. The space heater hummed its mechanical lullaby, but sleep remained elusive. My mind wandered to my years in the Corps, to the battles fought and won, to the respect earned through service and sacrifice. I thought about the young Marines I'd mentored, the difficult decisions I'd made under pressure, the leadership skills I'd developed through adversity. That woman, the Marine who'd earned her place through competence and courage, seemed like a stranger now. When had I become this diminished version of myself, accepting scraps of attention and apologizing for my own needs? When had I traded my hard-earned dignity for the illusion of family harmony? The rain returned that night, drumming against the garage roof with increasing intensity, but inside my chest, something else was building, a storm of recognition and resolve that would soon change everything. The pattern was clear now, and patterns could be broken. The question wasn't whether I deserved better treatment. It was whether I had the courage to demand it. As the storm outside gathered strength, so did the one within me. This old Marine was about to remember who she really was, and some lessons were about to be taught that wouldn't be easily forgotten. The first crack in my carefully maintained composure came during Sophie's piano recital preparation. She had been practicing Chopin's Minute Waltz for weeks, her small fingers dancing across the keys with determination that reminded me of myself at that age, focused, persistent, unwilling to accept anything less than excellence. I found myself drawn to these practice sessions, sitting quietly in the corner of the living room while she worked through difficult passages, offering gentle encouragement when frustration threatened to overwhelm her 7-year-old patience. "Grandma." "Kay, do you think I'm getting better?" she asked one afternoon, her face flushed with concentration after a particularly challenging run-through. "You're not just getting better, sweetheart," I replied, settling beside her on the piano bench. "You're developing discipline. That's something that will serve you well beyond music." Sophie beamed at the praise, then surprised me by asking, "Did you play piano when you were in the Marines?" The question caught me off guard. In all my time here, no one had asked about my military service, my experiences, or the skills I'd developed during my 22 years in uniform. No piano in the Marines, honey, but I did learn to play guitar. Music was one of the ways we stayed connected to home during deployments. "Will you teach me guitar too?" Her eyes lit up with the kind of pure enthusiasm that children possess before the world teaches them to temper their expectations. Before I could respond, Brianna's voice cut through the moment like a blade. "Sophie, you need to focus on one instrument at a time. Piano lessons are expensive enough without adding distractions." The word distractions landed with particular weight. Not other interests or additional activities, but distractions. As if my offer to share something meaningful with my granddaughter was inherently problematic, something to be managed and contained. Sophie's face fell, and I felt something shift inside my chest. A tightening, a recognition of a pattern I'd been too accommodating to acknowledge. This wasn't the first time my attempts to connect with Sophie had been subtly discouraged. The bedtime stories I'd offered to read were deemed too stimulating before sleep. The weekend hiking trip I'd suggested was too ambitious for Sophie's current fitness level. The cooking lessons I'd proposed were unnecessary since Sophie needs to focus on her schoolwork. Each rejection had been delivered with reasonable explanations, wrapped in concerns for Sophie's well-being or schedule. But taken together, they formed a clear message. My influence was unwelcome, my presence barely tolerated. That evening, as I helped clear dinner dishes, one of the few tasks I was still permitted to perform, I overheard a conversation between Marcus and Brianna in the hallway. Their voices were low, but the acoustics of the house carried their words clearly to the kitchen. "She's getting too involved with Sophie," Brianna was saying, her tone sharp with irritation. "Piano lessons, guitar lessons, hiking trips. She's trying to overstep boundaries." "Mom's just trying to be helpful," Marcus replied, but his voice lacked conviction. "She loves spending time with Sophie." That's exactly the problem. Sophie is getting confused about who makes decisions in this house. "Your mother acts like she has equal say in our daughter's upbringing." The dishes in my hands suddenly felt impossibly heavy. Equal say. As if a grandmother's love and interest in her grandchild's development was a territorial invasion rather than a natural family dynamic. "What do you want me to do?" Marcus asked, and I could hear the weariness in his voice. This was a conversation they'd had before. Talk to her. Set boundaries. This is our home, our family, our decisions. She needs to understand that. Our family. The words echoed in my mind as I stood frozen at the kitchen sink. Not our family including her, but our family as a unit that excluded me, that saw me as an outsider whose involvement needed to be limited and controlled. I finished the dishes, mechanically, my movements automatic while my mind processed this revelation. How had I missed the sign so completely? How had I interpreted their tolerance as acceptance, their measured politeness as genuine warmth? The answer was uncomfortable but clear. I had seen what I wanted to see. Desperate for family connection after years of solitary retirement, I had convinced myself that their willingness to accept my financial help indicated genuine affection. I had mistaken their accommodation for love. That night in the garage, sleep eluded me entirely. I lay on the thin mattress, staring at the ceiling, while rain drummed against the metal roof with increasing intensity. The sound reminded me of nights in base housing during storms, but then I had been surrounded by fellow Marines who respected my rank and service. Now I was alone in a space that felt more like exile than accommodation. My phone buzzed with a notification from my banking app. The monthly mortgage assistance payment had been automatically transferred. $400, deducted from my account at midnight like clockwork. I stared at the transaction record, noting how it reduced my already modest savings balance. How many more months could I sustain this arrangement? How many more months? Did I want to? The questions multiplied in the darkness. When had helping my son become subsidizing my own marginalization? When had generosity become a transaction that purchased not gratitude but tolerance? When had I agreed to pay for the privilege of being treated like an unwelcome houseguest in a home I had helped purchase? Morning brought no relief from these troubling thoughts. I woke at my usual 05:30, but instead of immediately rising, I allowed myself a few extra minutes to listen to the house around me. Upstairs, I could hear the familiar sounds of morning routines: shower running, footsteps on hardwood floors, muffled conversations between Marcus and Brianna as they prepared for their day. These were the sounds of a family I was not truly part of, despite my financial contributions to their lifestyle. I was a supporting character in their story, useful for certain functions, but not integral to their happiness or daily rhythms. When I finally made my way into the house for my morning routine, I found Brianna already in the kitchen, preparing Sophie's lunch with her characteristic efficiency. She looked up as I entered, and I caught something in her expression, a flicker of annoyance quickly masked by polite acknowledgement. "Good morning, Catherine," she said, using my full name as always. Never Kay, never Mom, always the formal distance of Catherine. I hope the garage wasn't too uncomfortable last night. The rain was quite heavy. The comment was delivered with apparent concern, but I heard the underlying message: you're sleeping in the garage because that's where you belong. Not because of space constraints or temporary inconvenience, but because that's your designated place in this household hierarchy. It was fine, I replied automatically, then paused. Why was I reassuring her about my comfort when she was the one who had banished me to sleeping quarters that would be considered substandard for a pet? Sophie appeared at the kitchen doorway, already dressed for school but moving slowly, reluctantly. "I don't want to go to school today," she announced with the dramatic flair of childhood. "My stomach hurts." Brianna immediately shifted into clinical mode, checking Sophie's temperature and asking specific questions about symptoms. As she worked, she explained her process to me in the tone one might use with a babysitter or housekeeper. "Sophie sometimes develops psychosomatic symptoms when she's anxious about school performance. The key is to distinguish between legitimate illness and attention-seeking behavior." The casual dismissal of Sophie's distress bothered me more than I expected. In my experience, children rarely fabricated illness without underlying emotional reasons. But before I could offer my perspective, Brianna had already made her diagnosis and begun preparing Sophie for school despite her protests. "Sometimes," I ventured carefully, "children need extra reassurance when they're feeling overwhelmed. Maybe—" "Catherine," Brianna interrupted, her voice sharp with barely concealed irritation. "I appreciate your concern, but I'm quite capable of managing my daughter's health. Medical decisions are best left to those with proper training." The rebuke was swift and cutting. Not only was my input unwelcome, but my lack of medical credentials was being used to dismiss any insights I might offer, based on decades of life experience and natural maternal instincts. Marcus entered the kitchen, at that moment, creating a brief tableau of family morning chaos that might have looked normal to an outside observer. But I felt the undercurrents clearly now, the subtle ways my presence was managed, minimized, and marginalized. "Mom, could you handle grocery shopping again today?" Marcus asked, not quite meeting my eyes. "Brianna's got back-to-back clinicals, and I've got that presentation this afternoon." The request was phrased politely, but I recognized the dynamic at play. I was useful for errands and domestic labor, valuable for financial contributions, but not welcome for emotional input or family decision-making. I was hired help masquerading as family, paying for the privilege of being utilized rather than appreciated. "Of course," I heard myself say, the automatic response of someone who had learned to accommodate rather than advocate for herself. After they left, I sat alone in their kitchen, surrounded by the comfortable middle-class lifestyle my contributions helped maintain. The granite countertops, the stainless steel appliances, the carefully chosen decorative touches, all purchased with a mortgage I was helping to pay while sleeping on a camping mattress in their garage. The absurdity of the situation suddenly struck me with crystalline clarity. I was a decorated military veteran who had commanded respect and authority throughout my career, reduced to tiptoeing around my own son's house, grateful for scraps of attention and apologetic for my very existence. How had this happened? How had I allowed myself to become so diminished, so eager to please that I had forgotten my own worth? The answer was uncomfortable but necessary. I had confused love with compliance, generosity with self-sacrifice. I had given until giving became expected, helped until helping became demanded, accommodated until accommodation became my defining characteristic. But recognition was the first step toward change. And as I sat in that kitchen, surrounded by evidence of my financial contributions and emotional exclusion, I began to understand that some patterns needed to be broken, some boundaries needed to be established, and some respect needed to be demanded rather than simply hoped for. The old Marine was beginning to remember who she used to be, and that woman wouldn't have tolerated this treatment for a single day, let alone months of systematic diminishment. The wake-up call came on a Thursday evening in mid-November, delivered with the devastating clarity that only accidental discoveries can provide. I had returned from my usual afternoon exile at the local coffee shop, timing my arrival for after Brianna's study hours but before dinner preparation. The house felt different somehow. There was an energy in the air, a sense of suppressed excitement that I couldn't quite identify. Sophie met me at the door, practically vibrating with enthusiasm. "Grandma Kay, guess what? Mommy and Daddy have a surprise." Before I could respond, she grabbed my hand and pulled me toward the living room, where Marcus and Brianna sat close together on the couch, sharing what appeared to be a bottle of champagne. The scene was intimate, celebratory, and I felt immediately like an intruder, despite being invited in by their daughter. "Mom!" Marcus stood up, his face flushed with alcohol and excitement. Perfect timing. We have incredible news. Brianna remained seated, her smile bright but somehow not reaching her eyes when she looked at me. We've been keeping it quiet until everything was finalized, but Marcus just got offered a position at Denver General's Rehabilitation Center. Full-time, excellent benefits, and the salary is significant enough that we can finally achieve true financial independence. The words hung in the air, loaded with implications I was only beginning to process. Financial independence. The phrase felt pointed, deliberate, as if it carried a message specifically intended for me. "That's wonderful," I managed, forcing enthusiasm into my voice while my mind raced through the potential meanings behind their announcement. "When do you start?" "Next month," Marcus replied, refilling his champagne glass with slightly unsteady hands. The timing couldn't be better. With Brianna finishing her certification program in this new position, we'll finally be able to handle all our expenses without any outside assistance. There it was. Outside assistance. Not family support, not generous help from a loving mother, but outside assistance, as if my contributions had been some sort of government program they were now graduating from rather than love expressed through financial sacrifice. Sophie, oblivious to the adult undercurrents, continued chattering about the celebration. "Daddy says we can get a bigger Christmas tree this year, and maybe go on a vacation to Disney World." "That sounds exciting, sweetheart," I said, crouching down to her level while processing the implications of their newfound financial confidence. A bigger Christmas tree, Disney World vacation, luxuries that would be possible because they no longer needed to allocate funds for basic mortgage assistance. "Why don't you go wash up for dinner, Sophie?" Brianna suggested, her voice carrying the subtle authority that always made her requests sound like gentle commands. "We'll be eating soon." As Sophie skipped away, the atmosphere in the room shifted palpably. The celebratory energy remained, but it felt more exclusive now, more like a private party I was observing rather than participating in. "This calls for a toast," Marcus declared, moving toward the kitchen. "Mom, let me get you a glass." "Oh, that's not necessary," Brianna interjected quickly. "Catherine doesn't drink much, do you? And we only have the one bottle. It was a special purchase to celebrate." The dismissal was so smooth, so casually delivered, that it took me a moment to recognize the subtle cruelty embedded within it. Not only was I excluded from their champagne celebration, but my exclusion was justified by assumptions about my preferences that no one had bothered to verify. "Actually," I said quietly, "I do enjoy champagne on special occasions." An uncomfortable silence followed my words. Marcus looked between his wife and me, clearly torn between including his mother and maintaining whatever dynamic had been established in my absence. "Of course," Brianna said finally, her smile tightening almost imperceptibly. "Marcus, perhaps there's another bottle in the pantry?" But the damage was done. The message had been delivered clearly. This celebration was not intended to include me. I was an observer to their happiness, not a participant in it. As Marcus busied himself searching for additional champagne, Brianna leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a more confidential tone. "Catherine, since we're discussing changes, this might be a good time to talk about the future arrangements." My stomach clenched with sudden apprehension. "What kind of arrangements?" "Well, with our improved financial situation, we'll be reassessing all of our household dynamics. Marcus and I have been discussing how to optimize our living space, especially with Sophie getting older and needing more room for activities and study areas." The euphemisms were elegant in their cruelty. Household dynamics, living space optimization, Sophie's needs, all carefully constructed phrases that avoided the direct statement, "We don't want you here anymore." "I see," I said, though I didn't see at all. How had my presence, which had been tolerated if not welcomed, suddenly become incompatible with Sophie's development? Marcus returned with a dusty bottle of champagne, clearly retrieved from long-term storage rather than recent purchase. As he worked the cork free, Brianna continued her explanation with the practiced efficiency of someone who had rehearsed these talking points. "We're so grateful for everything you've done to help us get established. The financial support, the household assistance, the time with Sophie. It's all been invaluable during our transition period." Transition period. Another euphemism, suggesting that my role had always been temporary, a scaffolding to be removed once the real structure was stable. But now that we're moving into this new phase of self-sufficiency, we think it might be healthier for everyone if we establish more traditional boundaries. You understand how important it is for a nuclear family to develop its own rhythms and independence. The cork popped with a sound like a small gunshot, startling me back to the immediate moment. Marcus poured 3 glasses, his movements careful and deliberate as if he were handling something more fragile than champagne. "To new beginnings," Brianna proposed, raising her glass with a smile that somehow managed to be both bright and dismissive. We drank, the bubbles sharp and acidic on my tongue. Around us, the comfortable living room, with its carefully chosen furniture and coordinated color scheme, all made possible by my down payment contribution, felt suddenly foreign and unwelcoming. "When would this transition take place?" I asked, proud that my voice remained steady despite the emotional earthquake occurring beneath my feet. "Well, we were thinking after the holidays," Marcus said, finally entering the conversation. "That gives everyone time to adjust to the idea, and it means Sophie can have a normal Christmas without any disruptions." Normal Christmas. As if my presence during previous holidays had been abnormal, disruptive rather than contributing to family traditions. Where would I go? The question slipped out before I could stop it, revealing a vulnerability I hadn't intended to show. "Oh, Catherine, you'll figure something out." Brianna said with the kind of casual confidence reserved for other people's problems. You're so resourceful, and you've got your pension and savings. Maybe this is the perfect opportunity to explore new adventures, travel, maybe move somewhere with a better climate for retirement. The suggestions flowed easily, as if my displacement was an exciting opportunity rather than a devastating rejection. Travel, new adventures, better climate, all ways of describing exile that made it sound voluntary and beneficial. Sophie's voice drifted from the bathroom, singing a song she'd learned at school about Thanksgiving and family. The irony was sharp enough to cut. Here we were, discussing my removal from their lives while she innocently celebrated the concept of grateful families. I need some air, I announced abruptly, setting down my champagne glass and moving toward the back door before anyone could respond. The evening air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of wood smoke from neighboring chimneys. I stood on their back deck, the deck attached to the house I had helped purchase, and tried to process what had just occurred. The conversation replayed in my mind with brutal clarity. Financial independence, traditional boundaries, nuclear, family rhythms, transition period. Every phrase carefully chosen to make my eviction sound reasonable, even beneficial for all parties involved. But beneath the diplomatic language, the message was unmistakable. You are no longer needed here. Your financial contributions had been useful during their struggling period, but now that they could manage independently, my presence had become an inconvenience to be managed, rather than a gift to be treasured. The back door opened behind me, and Marcus stepped onto the deck, his expression troubled. Mom, I hope you understand that this isn't personal. It's just that Brianna and I need to establish our own family identity, you know? I turned to face my son, this man I had raised and sacrificed for, who was now explaining why I needed to be removed from his life for his own good. Marcus, do you remember when you were deployed in Afghanistan and you called me every week, sometimes crying because you felt so isolated from everyone you loved? He nodded, confusion evident in his eyes at the apparent change of subject. Do you remember what I told you during those calls? You said that family was the anchor that kept us connected to who we really were, no matter how far from home we traveled. And now you're telling me that I need to be cut loose from that anchor so you can develop your own family identity. The words hung between us in the cold air. Marcus opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again, perhaps recognizing the contradiction inherent in his position. It's different now, he said finally. But his voice lacked conviction. Yes, I agreed. It is different. Then you needed me, and now you don't. Then I was family, and now I'm outside assistance to be phased out. I walked past him toward the house, pausing at the door to deliver the observation that had crystallized during our conversation. Just remember, son, the independence you're so eager to establish comes with a price. Make sure you're prepared to pay it. Inside, Brianna was clearing away the champagne glasses, her movements efficient and purposeful. She looked up as I entered, her expression pleasant but distant, as if our earlier conversation had been routine business rather than a fundamental restructuring of family relationships. Catherine, I hope you don't think we're being unreasonable. This transition will be much healthier for everyone in the long run. I looked at her. This woman who had systematically eroded my place in my son's life while benefiting from my financial support, and felt something fundamental shift inside my chest. Not anger exactly, but a clarity that had been missing for months. I'm sure you're right, I said calmly. Transitions can be very revealing about people's true priorities. That night, lying on the camping mattress in the garage, I replayed every moment of the evening's revelations. The champagne celebration I was initially excluded from. The careful euphemisms describing my eviction. The casual dismissal of my contributions and presence. But most telling was the timing. They had waited until Marcus secured permanent employment to have this conversation. They had waited until my financial assistance was no longer essential to their survival. They had waited until they felt safe to discard me. The pattern was clear now, undeniable in its calculated cruelty. I had been useful during their struggling period, tolerated during their stabilization phase, and now I was being discarded during their prosperity period. Outside, the November wind rattled the garage door with increasing intensity, but inside my chest a different kind of storm was building, one that would soon remind my family that some lessons about respect and gratitude needed to be taught rather than simply expected. The old Marine was fully awake now, and she had some decisions to make. The internal storm that had been building for weeks finally broke the morning after their champagne celebration. I woke at 04:45 hours, nearly an hour earlier than usual, my body rejecting sleep as my mind processed the devastating revelations of the previous evening. The concrete floor beneath my camping mattress felt harder than ever, a physical reminder of just how far I had fallen in my own estimation and in the eyes of my family. I lay in the darkness, listening to the familiar sounds of the house awakening above me. Water running through pipes, footsteps on hardwood floors, the distant murmur of morning conversations, all the comfortable rhythms of family life that I was no longer truly part of. The garage felt more like a prison cell than temporary accommodation, and for the first time since arriving, I allowed myself to acknowledge the full scope of my humiliation. How had I become this person? This diminished version of myself, who accepted scraps of attention and apologized for her own existence? The woman lying on this garage floor bore no resemblance to the Marine who had earned respect through competence and courage, who had led troops through dangerous situations and made life-or-death decisions under pressure. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. It had been gradual, insidious, like water wearing away stone. Each small accommodation had seemed reasonable in isolation. Sleeping in the garage was temporary. Keeping quiet during study hours was considerate. Avoiding family mealtimes was helpful. But taken together, these concessions had created a pattern of systematic diminishment that had reduced me to a ghost haunting the margins of my son's life. The betrayal cut deeper than I had initially realized. This wasn't just about Marcus choosing his wife over his mother, or about Brianna's territorial behavior regarding her nuclear family. This was about the calculated timing of their revelation, the way they had waited until my financial contributions were no longer essential before announcing my expulsion from their lives. They had used me. Not just my money, though that was substantial enough. The down payment, the monthly mortgage assistance, the ongoing household expenses I had absorbed without complaint. They had used my love, my desire for family connection, my willingness to sacrifice for those I cared about. They had taken my generosity and transformed it into a weapon against my own dignity. The garage door rattled in the morning wind, and I felt something inside me rattle in response. Not fear or sadness, but a growing fury that felt both foreign and familiar. Foreign because I had suppressed it for months, and familiar because it reminded me of the controlled anger that had fueled my military service, the righteous indignation that had driven me to excel in environments where women were still fighting for basic respect. I rose from the mattress with new purpose, my movements sharp and decisive. The morning routine that had become an exercise in tiptoeing around other people's comfort transformed into something different. Preparation for battle. Not the chaotic, emotional confrontation that accomplished nothing, but the strategic, calculated response that produced results. In the bathroom, I studied my reflection with new eyes. The woman staring back at me looked older than her 58 years, worn down by months of accepting unacceptable treatment. But beneath the surface weariness, I could see traces of the officer who had once commanded respect without asking for it, who had earned her place through merit rather than pleading. The kitchen was empty when I entered, giving me a few precious minutes to center myself before the household morning routine began. I made coffee with deliberate precision, each movement a small act of reclaiming space that belonged to me as much as anyone else. After all, My contributions had helped purchase this kitchen, these appliances, this comfortable suburban lifestyle they were now eager to enjoy without my presence. Sophie appeared first, as always, her hair wild from sleep and her school uniform wrinkled from restless nights. But this morning, instead of our usual easy interaction, I found myself studying her with new awareness. How much had she absorbed of her parents' attitude toward me? How much had she learned about treating family members as disposable when they were no longer useful? "Morning, Grandma Kay," she said, climbing onto her usual stool at the kitchen island. "Are you making pancakes today?" The question, innocent as it was, highlighted one of the many ways my role had been restricted. Pancakes were too disruptive to Brianna's carefully planned nutrition schedule. Bedtime stories were too stimulating before sleep. Weekend adventures were too ambitious for Sophie's development. Every natural grandmotherly impulse had been managed, minimized, or eliminated entirely. "Not today, sweetheart," I replied, but this time I didn't automatically defer to Brianna's preferences. "But maybe soon we can have a special pancake breakfast. Just you and me." Brianna entered the kitchen at that moment, her timing so perfect it seemed orchestrated. She was already dressed in her clinical scrubs, her expression alert and purposeful as she began her morning efficiency routine. "Sophie, you know the rule about breakfast consistency," she said, her voice carrying that familiar tone of gentle authority. "Your body needs reliable nutrition patterns for optimal performance." The casual dismissal of my interaction with Sophie struck differently this morning. Instead of shrinking back into apologetic accommodation, I felt that familiar, military bearing straighten my spine. "Actually, Brianna," I said calmly, "occasional treats are part of normal childhood development. Rigid dietary restrictions can create unhealthy relationships with food." The kitchen fell silent. Brianna's movement stilled, her coffee mug suspended halfway to her lips. Sophie looked between us with the wide-eyed awareness children develop when they sense adult tension. "Catherine," Brianna said carefully, setting down her mug with deliberate precision, "I appreciate your perspective, but medical nutrition is my area of expertise. Sophie's dietary needs are quite specific." The dismissal was swift and familiar, but this time I didn't accept it. "Expertise is valuable," I agreed, "but so is experience. I raised a healthy, successful son without micromanaging every meal." Marcus chose that moment to enter the kitchen, his arrival creating a triangle of tension that charged the air with uncomfortable energy. He looked between his wife and mother, clearly sensing the shift in dynamics, but uncertain how to navigate it. "Everything okay?" he asked, the question directed to no one in particular. "Fine," Brianna replied quickly, but her eyes remained fixed on me with new wariness. "Just discussing Sophie's nutritional needs." "Discussing," I repeated thoughtfully. That's an interesting word choice. I was under the impression that all decisions regarding Sophie were made exclusively by her parents, with input from others considered unnecessary interference. The reference to their previous evening's conversation was subtle, but unmistakable. Marcus had the grace to look uncomfortable, while Brianna's expression hardened into something more openly hostile. "Catherine, if you have concerns about family dynamics, perhaps we should discuss them privately rather than in front of Sophie." The suggestion was reasonable on its surface, but I recognized the tactical maneuver. Remove the conflict from witnesses, make it easier to minimize and dismiss. In military terms, she was trying to isolate me from potential allies and neutral observers. "You're absolutely right," I agreed, surprising her. "Family dynamics should be discussed openly and honestly, with all parties present who are affected by the decisions being made." Sophie finished her oatmeal and gathered her school supplies, her movements unusually quiet as she navigated the adult tension surrounding her. I watched her careful behavior and felt a pang of recognition. She was learning to tiptoe around conflict, to make herself small when grown-ups were uncomfortable. The pattern was already being established. "Sophie," I said gently, "remember that you don't have to make yourself invisible when adults disagree. Your voice matters too. Brianna's sharp intake of breath was audible. Sophie, finish getting ready for school. Your father will drive you today. As Sophie left the kitchen, the three adults remained in their uncomfortable triangle. The air felt thick with unspoken accusations and carefully controlled anger. "Mom," Marcus said quietly, "maybe we should talk about this later, when everyone's had time to what?" I interrupted, my military directness cutting through his diplomatic hedging. Time to forget about it? Time to pretend it didn't happen? Time to return to the status quo where I apologize for existing and grateful for scraps of attention? The questions hung in the kitchen air like smoke. Marcus looked stricken, while Brianna's expression shifted from wariness to open calculation. She was reassessing the situation, determining how much resistance she was facing and how to neutralize it. "Catherine, I think you're overreacting to a simple conversation about household boundaries," she said, her voice taking on the patronizing tone reserved for unreasonable people. "We're all adults here. Surely we can discuss these matters rationally." Rationally, another word designed to make my growing anger seem unreasonable, emotional, feminine in the most dismissive sense. But I had learned long ago how to channel anger into cold precision, how to use controlled fury as a tactical advantage. "You're absolutely right," I said calmly. "Let's discuss this rationally. Let's talk numbers." I moved to the kitchen island, placing my hands flat on the granite surface, granite that my down payment had helped purchase. $60,000 for the down payment, $400 monthly for mortgage assistance, approximately $2,000 in household expenses and groceries over the past 4 months. What's the rational calculation for that level of financial contribution? Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, we never asked you to—" "You're right. You never asked. You simply accepted. Month after month, transfer after transfer, you accepted my contributions while systematically excluding me from the family life those contributions supported." Brianna's mask of diplomatic concern was slipping. "We never excluded you. You've been welcomed into our home." "Into your garage," I corrected sharply. "Let's be precise about the accommodation I've been provided. I've been sleeping on a camping mattress in a garage while financially supporting the mortgage on bedrooms I'm not allowed to use." The stark reality of the arrangement, stated plainly and without euphemism, created a moment of uncomfortable silence. Even Brianna seemed momentarily speechless at having her careful rationalizations stripped away so brutally. "This is temporary," Marcus said weakly. "We explained about the space constraints. Space constraints that apparently will be resolved by my permanent removal from your lives," I said, referencing their previous evening's announcement. "How convenient that your space issues coincide perfectly with your newfound financial independence." The tactical advantage of speaking truth plainly was becoming clear. Their careful justifications crumbled when confronted with direct statements about cause and effect, about the relationship between my financial contributions and their treatment of me. Brianna recovered first, her clinical training providing her with tools for managing difficult conversations. "Catherine, I understand you're feeling emotional about the transition we discussed, but surely you can see that this arrangement benefits everyone. You'll regain your independence and will establish healthier family boundaries." The language was still euphemistic, still designed to make my expulsion sound like mutual benefit, but this time I didn't accept the framing. "Healthier for whom?" I asked directly. "Healthier for you to enjoy the financial stability my contributions provided without the inconvenience of my presence? Healthier for Marcus to avoid the discomfort of choosing between his wife's demands and his mother's dignity? Or healthier for Sophie to learn that family members become disposable when they're no longer useful?" The last question landed with particular impact. Both Marcus and Brianna understood the implications. They were teaching their daughter that love was conditional, that family loyalty had expiration dates, that people could be discarded when they became inconvenient. Marcus looked genuinely stricken now, perhaps beginning to understand the broader implications of their decisions. but Brianna's expression had hardened into something approaching contempt. "I think you're being overly dramatic," she said coldly. "This is simply a matter of adults making rational decisions about living arrangements." Rational decisions. Adult. Choices. The language of people who had convinced themselves that cruelty could be justified through proper terminology and careful planning. But I was done with their euphemisms and rationalizations. The storm inside me had reached full force, and it was time to let them see exactly what they had awakened. "You're absolutely right," I said with deadly calm. "It is time for adults to make rational decisions. Thank you for clarifying exactly where everyone stands." The conversation was over, but the war was just beginning. The decision crystallized with the cold precision of a military operation. I sat in my rental car outside the First National Bank of Denver, engine running, heat blasting against the November chill that seemed to have settled permanently in my bones. Through the large glass windows, I could see the clean, professional interior, polished floors, modern furniture, and the kind of institutional calm that masked the life-altering transactions conducted within those walls daily. My hands gripped the steering wheel as I reviewed the intelligence I had gathered over the past 3 days. The mortgage documents were in my name as co-signer, a detail I had forgotten in my eagerness to help Marcus and Brianna achieve their home ownership dreams. The automatic payments flowed from my account not as gifts or assistance, but as contractual obligations I had legally committed to fulfill. Most importantly, my financial liability for their mortgage gave me certain rights that they had either forgotten or never understood. The morning's confrontation in the kitchen had been the final catalyst, but the decision itself had been building for days. Every night spent on that garage floor, every subtle dismissal of my contributions, every casual exclusion from family decisions, they had all been adding fuel to a fire that was now ready to consume everything they thought they understood about our relationship. I checked my phone one final time. The automatic transfer was scheduled to process in 6 hours, another $400 flowing from my dwindling savings to support their comfortable lifestyle. But this would be the last time that transaction occurred. After today, Marcus and Brianna would discover exactly what financial independence really meant. The bank's interior was exactly as pristine as it appeared from outside. Soft classical music played over hidden speakers, and the air carried the faint scent of leather and fresh flowers. I approached the reception desk where a young woman with perfectly styled blonde hair greeted me with professional enthusiasm. "Good morning! How can I help you today?" "I need to speak with someone about mortgage account modifications," I said, my voice carrying the authoritative tone I had perfected during decades of military service. "Specifically, I need to remove myself from automatic payment arrangements and discuss my options as a co-signer." Her smile flickered slightly. Mortgage modifications were complex transactions that required senior staff involvement. "Certainly. Let me connect you with one of our loan specialists. May I have your name and account information?" Within minutes, I was seated across from Thomas Chen, a middle-aged loan officer whose desk was organized with the same precision I had once demanded from my subordinates. His expression was professional but curious as he pulled up the mortgage account on his computer screen. "Mrs. Patterson, I see you're listed as co-signer on this mortgage with Marcus Patterson and Brianna Patterson. The account shows regular, automatic payments from your personal checking account. What changes are you looking to make?" The question was straightforward, but I could see him processing the unusual nature of the situation. Most co-signers didn't voluntarily make payments on behalf of the primary borrowers, and they certainly didn't typically seek to remove themselves from payment arrangements. "I want to cancel all automatic payments immediately," I said clearly. "Additionally, I need to understand my legal options regarding the mortgage agreement itself." Thomas Chen's fingers moved efficiently across his keyboard, pulling up screens of information that would determine the immediate future of my son's financial stability. "I can certainly cancel the automatic payments, effective immediately. However, I should explain the implications for the account holders. He turned his monitor slightly so I could see the payment history. Months of regular transfers from my account, maintaining the mortgage in good standing despite the primary borrowers. Inability to cover the full payment amount. Without your supplemental payments, the primary borrowers will be responsible for the full mortgage amount of $2,800 monthly. Based on the income information we have on file, this may create a significant financial strain. Significant financial strain. The euphemism was almost elegant in its understatement. Based on my knowledge of Marcus's current income and Brianna's student expenses, they would be facing an immediate crisis within 30 days of my payment cessation. That's their responsibility to manage, I replied calmly. As co-signer, what are my rights if they default on payments? The question hung in the air between us, loaded with implications that Thomas Chen clearly understood. His expression shifted from routine customer service to something more cautious, more aware of the potential complexities involved. As co-signer, you're legally liable for the full mortgage amount if the primary borrowers default. However, you also have certain protections and options. If payments become delinquent, you can take over the mortgage entirely, assume full ownership of the property, or initiate foreclosure proceedings. The words felt like pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. Marcus and Brianna had treated me like a convenient ATM, assuming my financial support while planning my removal from their lives. They had forgotten that financial entanglement created legal obligations that flowed in both directions. I want to cancel the automatic payments today, I confirmed. Please provide me with documentation of all payment history and a complete copy of the mortgage agreement. Thomas Chen's fingers moved across his keyboard with increased urgency. Mrs. Patterson, I have to ask, is this decision related to a family dispute? Sometimes emotions run high in these situations, and we've seen people make financial decisions they later regret. The question was professionally phrased, but I heard the underlying concern. He was trying to determine whether I was acting impulsively, whether this was a temporary emotional reaction that might be reversed once cooler heads prevailed. Mr. Chen, I said, leaning forward slightly, I'm a retired Marine with 22 years of service. I don't make impulsive decisions about anything, especially not financial matters that affect my family. This decision is based on careful analysis of an untenable situation that requires immediate correction. My military background seemed to reassure him about the deliberate nature of my decision. He nodded and continued processing the account, modifications, printing documents, and explaining procedures with professional efficiency. The automatic payment cancellation will be effective immediately. The next scheduled payment date is December 1st, which means the primary borrowers will need to make arrangements for the full mortgage amount by that date to avoid late fees and potential delinquency. December 1st. 2 weeks away. 2 weeks for Marcus and Brianna to discover exactly what their newfound independence would cost them. Additionally, Thomas Chen continued, I'm required to inform you that as co-signer, you'll receive notifications of any payment delays or defaults. The bank will contact you directly if the primary borrowers fail to meet their obligations. Perfect. I would know immediately when their financial reality collided with their comfortable assumptions about my continued support. The paperwork took another 30 minutes to complete. I signed documents removing my automatic payment authorization, received copies of the complete mortgage agreement, and confirmed my contact information for future communications. Each signature felt like a small victory, a reclamation of control over my own financial destiny. As I prepared to leave, Thomas Chen offered one final observation. Mrs. Patterson, in my experience, family financial arrangements can become complicated very quickly. I hope this works out for everyone involved. His concern was genuine, but I found myself unmoved by the implicit suggestion that I might be causing unnecessary hardship. After months of financial support accompanied by systematic disrespect, I was no longer interested in protecting other people from the consequences of their choices. Mr. Chen, in my experience, People learn to value what they have to work for. My family is about to receive a very valuable education. The drive back to Marcus and Brianna's house felt different from any trip I had made over the past 4 months. Instead of the familiar weight of obligation and anxiety, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, the satisfaction of taking decisive action. The old Marine had emerged from hibernation, and she was ready to engage in strategic warfare. Parked in their driveway and sat for a moment, studying the house that my financial contributions had made possible. The Victorian architecture, the manicured landscaping, the expensive details that marked it as an upper-middle-class suburban dream, all of it maintained through my sacrifices while I slept in their garage like an unwelcome refugee. The irony was sharp and satisfying. They had wanted me to understand my place in their lives, to accept my role as financial contributor without emotional significance. Today, they would begin learning what that arrangement actually meant when stripped of the protective cushion of family obligation. Inside, the house was quiet. Marcus and Brianna were both at work, and Sophie was at school. I moved through the rooms I had helped purchase, seeing them with new eyes. Every piece of furniture, every decorative detail, every comfort they enjoyed, had been made possible through financial stability that included my contributions. But appreciation for those contributions had never translated into respect for my presence or consideration for my feelings. I climbed the stairs to the guest bedroom that had been converted into Brianna's study space, the room I had been banished from to accommodate her educational priorities. The space was organized with characteristic efficiency: medical textbooks arranged by subject, notebooks filled with precise handwriting, and a laptop displaying her academic schedule. On the desk, I noticed a financial planning worksheet, clearly a budget calculation for their post-graduation lifestyle. The projected income from Marcus's new position was carefully calculated, along with estimates for various expenses. At the bottom, a line item simply labeled Mortgage $2,800, with no notation about the $400 monthly assistance that had been making that payment possible. They had been planning their independent future while assuming my continued financial support. The worksheet revealed the depth of their presumption. They had calculated their budget based on the mortgage amount they could afford with my help, then announced their intention to exclude me from the family life that budget supported. Photographed the worksheet with my phone, not for any specific legal purpose, but as evidence of the casual way they had incorporated my financial sacrifice into their planning, while denying me basic respect and consideration. The afternoon stretched ahead of me with unusual freedom. For the first time in months, I didn't need to plan my activities around Brianna's study schedule or household preferences. I didn't need to make myself scarce during family time or tiptoe around their domestic routines. Instead, I drove to a nearby coffee shop and settled into a comfortable corner booth with a clear view of the mountains beyond Denver's suburban sprawl. The afternoon light streaming through large windows felt warm and welcoming in a way that Marcus and Brianna's house never had. I opened my laptop and began researching rental properties in my hometown of Colorado Springs. The search felt liberating rather than depressing. I was reclaiming control over my own housing situation rather than accepting whatever accommodation others deemed appropriate for me. My phone buzzed with a text message from my old Marine, buddy Janet, checking in from Arizona. "Hey Kay, how's the family visit going? Still spoiling that granddaughter of yours?" For the first time in months, I responded with complete honesty. Family visit ending soon. Time to reclaim my own life and remember who I am outside of being useful to other people. Her response came quickly. "About damn time. You've been tiptoeing around those people long enough. Come visit me in Phoenix when you're ready for some real family time." Real family time. The phrase resonated with painful accuracy. I had been so focused on maintaining relationships with people who saw me as a resource, rather than a person, that I had forgotten what genuine family connection felt like. As evening approached, I returned to the house knowing this would be one of my final nights in their garage. The automatic payment cancellation was already in effect. The mortgage company had been notified, and the countdown to their financial reckoning had begun. Marcus and Brianna would discover my decision soon enough. But for now, I savored the quiet. Satisfaction of knowing that their comfortable assumptions about my continued support had just been eliminated with the clinical precision of a surgical strike. The old Marine was back, and she had just launched her first offensive operation in a war they didn't even know had begun. The first indication that my strategic strike had found its target came exactly 8 days later. I was sitting in a coffee shop in downtown Colorado Springs, having moved back to my small apartment 3 days earlier without fanfare or extended goodbyes. The transition had been surprisingly smooth. Marcus and Brianna had accepted my departure with the same polite distance they had maintained throughout my stay, apparently relieved to reclaim their space without acknowledging what my presence had actually contributed to their household. My phone rang at 2:47 p.m., the caller ID displaying Marcus's name. I let it go to voicemail, sipping my cappuccino while watching late autumn snow dust the mountains visible through the coffee shop's large windows. The voicemail notification appeared immediately, followed by 2 text messages in rapid succession. Mom, call me back please, it's important. Mom, we need to talk. There's been some kind of mistake with the bank. A mistake with the bank? The euphemism was almost endearing in its naivety. I finished my coffee deliberately, enjoying the luxury of unhurried time that came with no longer managing other people's schedules and preferences. Only after I had paid my check and walked to my car did I listen to the voicemail. Marcus's voice carried a tension I hadn't heard since his deployment days. The particular strain of someone discovering that a situation they thought they understood had suddenly become incomprehensible. Mom, I'm getting calls from the mortgage company about missed payments, but that's impossible because the automatic transfer should have covered everything. They're saying something about payment authorization being canceled, but we never canceled anything. Can you call me back? There might be some kind of identity theft situation or bank error we need to sort out. Identity theft. Bank error. Even faced with the evidence of my financial withdrawal, he was searching for explanations that didn't require acknowledging the intentional nature of my actions. The cognitive dissonance was almost amusing. He couldn't conceive that his mother might have deliberately stopped subsidizing their lifestyle. I drove home before returning the call, wanting the comfort and privacy of my own space for what promised to be an illuminating conversation. My apartment felt like a sanctuary after months of walking on eggshells in someone else's home. Small, yes, but entirely mine, with no household, schedules to navigate or personalities to accommodate. When I finally called Marcus back, he answered on the first ring. Mom, thank God. Listen, we've got a serious problem here. The bank is saying our mortgage payment was short last month, and they're threatening late fees. They claim the automatic payment from your account was canceled, but that makes no sense. We never asked you to cancel anything. His voice carried the particular frustration of someone confronting an administrative error that threatened his carefully planned life. There was no recognition yet that this might be an intentional consequence, rather than an accidental oversight. Marcus, I said calmly, there's no bank error. I canceled the automatic payments myself last week. Silence stretched across the phone line. I could almost hear his mind processing this information, trying to reconcile it with his assumptions about our relationship and my role in their financial planning. You canceled them? But why would you? Mom, we depend on those payments. The mortgage is $2,800, and with my current income, we can barely cover $2,400. Without your help, we're going to default. The admission was delivered with the stunned realization of someone discovering that their safety net had been removed without warning. But what struck me most was the phrasing. They depended on those payments. Not appreciated, not grateful for, but depended on, as if my financial contribution was an entitlement rather than a gift. I see, I replied evenly. And when exactly? Were you planning to inform me about this dependency? Because from our last conversation, I understood that you had achieved financial independence and no longer needed outside assistance. Another pause. this one heavy with recognition. He was beginning to understand the connection between their celebratory announcement of independence and the sudden withdrawal of support that made their celebration possible. Mom, that's not... We didn't mean immediately. The transition was supposed to be gradual, after we had time to adjust our budget and... Adjust your budget with what additional income? I interrupted. Marcus, I've seen Brianna's financial planning worksheet. Your projected budget assumed continued mortgage assistance from me while simultaneously planning my removal from your household. You were calculating independence based on my continued dependency. The silence this time was different. Not confusion, but the uncomfortable recognition of being caught in a contradiction they hadn't expected to have exposed. It wasn't like that, he said finally, but his voice lacked conviction. We were just trying to plan for the future, to establish better boundaries. Boundaries, I repeated. That's an interesting word choice. Tell me, Marcus, what boundaries were you planning to establish around my financial contributions? Because it seems like the only boundary you wanted was keeping me out of your daily life while keeping my money in your bank account. The conversation was becoming heated in a way that our interactions rarely did. Marcus had always been conflict-averse, preferring to smooth over disagreements rather than address them directly. But financial pressure had a way of stripping away diplomatic niceties. Mom, you're making this sound calculated and cruel. We were trying to do what was best for everyone, including you. You said yourself that you wanted us to be independent. I wanted you to be independent, I agreed. But independence means taking responsibility for your own obligations, not maintaining dependence while claiming freedom. You can't be financially independent while relying on someone else's income to meet your basic expenses. The logic was unassailable, and Marcus seemed to recognize it. When he spoke again, his voice had shifted from defensive to desperate. Okay, you're right. We should have been clearer about the timeline, should have discussed this properly. But Mom, if you cut off the payments now, we're going to lose the house. We can't make the full mortgage payment without your help. There it was, the core truth they had been avoiding. Despite their celebration of financial independence, despite their excitement about no longer needing outside assistance, they were still entirely dependent on my contributions to maintain their lifestyle. That sounds like a problem you need to solve, I said calmly. Perhaps you could consider downsizing to something more affordable, or finding additional income sources, or asking Brianna's family for assistance. Brianna's family doesn't have money like that, Marcus said quickly. And we can't just sell the house immediately. The market conditions, the closing costs, Sophie's school district. Mom, we need time to figure this out. Time. The resource. They had been planning to deny me when they announced my impending eviction from their lives. Now they were asking for the same consideration they had been unwilling to extend. How much time did you give me to adjust to being banished from your family life? I asked. How much consideration did you show for my feelings when you announced that my presence was incompatible with your nuclear family dynamics? That's different. How is it different? You were asking me to accept a fundamental change in our relationship for your benefit. Now I'm asking you to accept a fundamental change in our financial arrangement for mine. The parallel was exact and uncomfortable. Marcus fell silent as he processed the implications of my comparison. In the background, I could hear Brianna's voice, sharp with anxiety. What is she saying? Marcus, we need that money. The payment is due in 6 days. 6 days. The timeline was even tighter than I had calculated. They were living with virtually no financial cushion, entirely dependent on my monthly contribution to avoid default. Mom, Marcus said, his voice taking on the pleading tone I remembered from his childhood. Please don't do this. We can work out the living situation, find a compromise that makes everyone comfortable. But if you cut off the mortgage assistance, we're going to be in serious financial trouble. You're already in serious financial trouble, I pointed out. You're just now becoming aware of it. Adults who are truly financially independent don't face foreclosure when one income source disappears. But you're not just any income source, he protested. You're family. Family helps each other through difficult times. Family. The word hung between us, loaded with months of accumulated resentment and disappointment. You're absolutely right, I said slowly. Family does help each other. Family shows consideration for each other's feelings. Family includes each other in important decisions. Family treats each other with basic respect and dignity. Each sentence landed like a hammer blow, emphasizing the gap between their expectations of familial support and their delivery of familial treatment. Family doesn't make each other sleep in garages while enjoying the benefits of their financial contributions. Family doesn't plan celebrations that exclude the people who made those celebrations possible. Family doesn't announce evictions disguised as transitions to independence. Marcus's breathing was audible over the phone line. Mom, I know we made mistakes. We should have handled things differently. Should have been more considerate. Should have been more grateful, I corrected. Should have acknowledged that your comfortable lifestyle was partially subsidized by someone you were treating like an unwelcome houseguest. You're right, he admitted finally. We took you for granted. We should have appreciated what you were doing for us instead of just expecting it to continue indefinitely. The admission was progress, but it felt too little, too late. Marcus, appreciation isn't just about saying thank you. It's about treating people in ways that demonstrate their value to you. For months, you and Brianna treated me like an inconvenience to be managed while benefiting from my financial support. What do you want us to do? He asked, desperation creeping into his voice. How do we fix this? The question was both simple and impossible. Trust, once broken, couldn't be easily repaired. Respect, once lost, couldn't be commanded back into existence through apologies and promises. I want you to learn to solve your own problems, I said finally. I want you to understand what independence actually costs. I want you to appreciate what you had instead of taking it for granted. But the house is your responsibility, not mine. You wanted independence, Marcus. This is what independence looks like. The call ended with mutual understanding. Not agreement, but clarity about our respective positions. Marcus finally understood that my financial support had not been unconditional, and I had finally established that respect was not optional in our relationship. Within an hour, my phone was ringing again. This time, it was Brianna. Catherine, we need to discuss this rationally. Marcus is being emotional, but I think we can find a reasonable solution. Even in crisis, she maintained, her clinical approach to problem solving, as if my decision was a medical condition that could be treated with the right intervention. I'm listening, I said, curious to hear her proposed solution. Obviously, we mishandled the communication about household arrangements. We should have been more diplomatic about the transition timeline. If you're willing to continue the mortgage, assistance for 6 more months, we can work out a more gradual adjustment that accommodates everyone's needs. 6 more months of financial support in exchange for more diplomatic management of my eviction from their lives. The proposal was breathtaking in its tone deafness. Brianna, I said with deadly calm, let me make sure I understand your solution. You want me to continue paying for the privilege of being gradually excluded from my son's family? I wouldn't phrase it that way, she replied quickly. This is about finding a mutually beneficial arrangement. Beneficial for whom? You get continued financial support and time to adjust your budget. What do I get besides the satisfaction of subsidizing my own marginalization? The question hung in the air, unanswered because there was no reasonable answer. Her solution was entirely one-sided, assuming that my primary concern was their financial stability rather than my own dignity. Catherine, I think you're being unnecessarily punitive. This affects Sophie too, you know. If we lose the house, she'll have to change schools, leave her friends. The emotional manipulation was expertly deployed, but I had seen too much tactical. maneuvering to be swayed by appeals to Sophie's welfare that conveniently aligned with Brianna's financial needs. Sophie's welfare should have been considered when you decided to create an unstable household budget that depended on contributions from someone you were planning to exclude from family life, I replied. You made choices that put her security at risk, not me. You're being unreasonable, Brianna said, her clinical mask finally slipping to reveal genuine anger. We're trying to find a compromise, and you're acting like a vindictive child. Vindictive child. The insult was delivered with the same casual contempt she had shown throughout my stay in their home. Brianna, I said, with the authority of someone who had commanded respect in much more challenging environments. Adults who make vindictive decisions don't give months of advance notice. They don't explain their reasoning or offer opportunities for discussion. They simply act. What do you mean? I mean you haven't seen vindictive yet. This conversation is over. The old Marine had drawn her line in the sand, and the real battle was just beginning. The crisis reached its peak exactly 17 days after I canceled the automatic payments. I was arranging books in my small apartment when the call came, not from Marcus this time, but from Thomas Chen at First National Bank. His voice carried the professional gravity reserved for serious financial matters. Mrs. Patterson, I'm calling to inform you that the mortgage account you co-signed has entered default status. The December payment was not received by the deadline, and late fees have been assessed. As co-signer, you're being notified of the delinquency and your potential liability. The words carried weight beyond their simple meaning. Default status meant Marcus and Brianna had failed to make even a partial payment, suggesting their financial situation was more desperate than I had anticipated. They weren't just struggling to cover the $400 shortfall my withdrawal had created. They were unable to meet any of their mortgage obligations. What's the total amount currently due? Asked, settling into my reading chair with a notepad. The missed December payment of $2,800, plus a late fee of $150, brings the current balance to $2,950. Additionally, if the January payment isn't received by the 15th, additional late fees and potential foreclosure proceedings could begin. Foreclosure proceedings. The nuclear option that would strip away all the comfortable illusions about temporary financial difficulties and manageable budget adjustments. If Marcus and Brianna were facing foreclosure, their situation had deteriorated far beyond what they had admitted during our previous conversations. Mr. Chen, what are my options as co-signer if I choose to address this delinquency? You could make the payment yourself to bring the account current, which would protect your credit rating and prevent foreclosure proceedings. Alternatively, you could assume full responsibility for the mortgage and take possession of the property, though that would require legal proceedings to remove the current occupants. Take possession of the property. The phrase resonated with possibilities I hadn't previously considered. The house that my down payment had purchased, that my monthly contributions had maintained, could potentially become entirely mine if Marcus and Brianna proved unable to fulfill their obligations. If I were to assume the mortgage, what would that process involve? Thomas Chen's voice became more cautious, recognizing the complexity of a family financial dispute that was moving beyond simple payment problems. Mrs. Patterson, that would require legal consultation. The current occupants would have rights that need to be addressed through proper channels. I'd strongly recommend speaking with an attorney who specializes in real estate and family law. After ending the call, I sat in the afternoon sunlight streaming through my apartment windows, considering options I had never imagined when I first agreed to help Marcus with his down payment. The house that had been intended as a gift to secure his future had become a weapon in a battle he had chosen to escalate. My phone buzzed with a text message from Sophie, the first direct communication I had received from anyone in their household since my confrontational conversation with Brianna 2 weeks earlier. Grandma Kay, Mommy and Daddy are fighting a lot. They say we might have to move. I miss you. The message hit harder than all of Marcus's desperate phone calls and Brianna's calculated negotiations. Sophie was experiencing the consequences of her parents' financial mismanagement, and my strategic response. Caught in the middle of adult conflicts she couldn't understand or control. I stared at the message for several minutes, feeling the familiar tug of protective instincts that had motivated my original generosity. Sophie's welfare had never been my target. She was collateral damage in a war between adults who had forgotten how to treat each other with basic respect. But responding to Sophie's message would complicate my strategic position. Any communication with their household would be interpreted as weakness, as evidence that I could be manipulated through emotional appeals involving my granddaughter's distress. Instead, I called my attorney, Sarah Walsh, whom I had consulted years earlier during my divorce proceedings. Her voice was crisp and professional when she answered. "Catherine, what can I do for you? I need advice about a mortgage co-signing situation that's become complicated," I explained, providing a concise summary of the financial arrangements, my withdrawal of support, and the current default status. Sarah listened without interruption, asking occasional clarifying questions about dates, amounts, and legal documentation. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment before responding. "Catherine, you're in a stronger legal position than you might realize. As co-signer with documented payment history, you have several options if the primary borrowers default. But before we discuss legal strategies, I need to ask, what outcome are you actually seeking here?" The question was direct and necessary. Was I trying to punish Marcus and Brianna for their treatment of me? Or was I trying to protect my own financial interests? Or was I seeking some form of reconciliation that restored respect to our relationship? "I want them to understand that actions have consequences," I said slowly. "I want them to learn that treating family members like disposable resources isn't acceptable. And I want to protect myself from continued financial exploitation." Those are all reasonable goals, but they might require different strategies. Punishing them could involve foreclosure proceedings that would destroy their credit and force them from the home. Protecting yourself might involve taking possession of the property. Reconciliation might require negotiated settlement that establishes new terms for ongoing relationship. The distinctions were important and sobering. Each path forward carried different risks and potential outcomes, not just for Marcus and Brianna, but for Sophie and for my own future relationship with my family. What would you recommend? First, let's establish your legal rights clearly. Can you come in tomorrow morning? I'll want to review all the mortgage documents and payment records before advising you on specific strategies. That evening, my phone rang constantly. Marcus called 6 times in 2 hours, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails. Brianna called twice, her messages alternating between attempts at negotiation and barely concealed threats about consequences for family relationships. Even Sophie managed to call once, her small voice asking when I was coming back to visit. I listened to each message but responded to none of them. Strategic advantage required maintaining distance while they experienced the full weight of their financial crisis. Any communication from me would give them hope that negotiation was possible, potentially reducing their motivation to find independent solutions to their problems. The next morning, Sarah Walsh's office provided the clarity I needed. The mortgage documents were unambiguous. As co-signer with established payment history, I had the right to assume full responsibility for the loan and take possession of the property if the primary borrowers defaulted beyond cure periods. However, Sarah cautioned, reviewing the paperwork, exercising those rights would require evicting your son's family from their home. Are you prepared for that level of conflict? The question forced me to confront the ultimate implications of my strategic campaign. Taking possession of the house would give me complete control over the property my money had purchased, but it would also destroy any possibility of reconciliation with Marcus and Brianna. Sophie would lose her home, her school district, her established social connections. What if they simply can't make the payments? I asked. What if their financial situation is genuinely unsustainable? Then foreclosure becomes inevitable whether you act or not. The difference is whether you control the timeline and outcome, or whether you let the bank drive the process while you remain liable for deficiency balances. Deficiency balances. Another complication I hadn't fully considered. If the house sold for less than the outstanding mortgage amount, I could be held responsible for the difference as cosigner. How much time do they have to cure the default? Typically, 30 to 60 days from the first missed payment, depending on the specific terms. After that, foreclosure proceedings can begin. 30 to 60 days. Marcus and Brianna had perhaps 3 weeks to find a solution before their options became severely limited. That afternoon, I received an unexpected visitor. Marcus appeared at my apartment door, looking haggard and desperate in a way that reminded me painfully of his teenage years when problems seemed insurmountable. "Mom, please, we need to talk." I let him in, noting how he avoided eye contact while surveying my small living space. The contrast with his suburban home was stark. My modest apartment versus the spacious house his family enjoyed with my financial assistance. "You look tired," I observed, settling into my reading chair while he remained standing near the door. "I haven't been sleeping much," he admitted. "Mom, we're about to lose everything. The bank is talking about foreclosure. Brianna's talking about leaving Colorado, and Sophie doesn't understand why her life is falling apart." The summary was delivered with the exhausted desperation of someone who had run out of options and was reduced to begging from the person he had previously taken for granted. "What did you expect to happen, Marcus? You celebrated achieving financial independence while depending on my income to pay your bills. You announced plans to remove me from your lives while assuming my continued financial support. Did you think there would be no consequences? I thought you'd be angry for a while." "Then forgive us," he said honestly. "I thought family loyalty would eventually win out over hurt feelings." Family loyalty. The phrase he had weaponized to justify taking my support for granted while denying me basic respect and consideration. "Loyalty works both directions," I said, quietly. "You wanted the benefits of family loyalty without providing the respect that makes loyalty meaningful." Marcus finally sat down, sinking into my small couch with the weight of someone carrying impossible burdens. "You're right. We treated you terribly. We took your generosity for granted and made you feel unwelcome in your own son's home. We were selfish and thoughtless and cruel." The admission was more complete than I had expected, delivered with genuine remorse rather than strategic calculation. But acknowledgement of wrongdoing, while necessary, wasn't sufficient to undo months of systematic disrespect. "What do you want from me, Marcus?" "I want you to save us," he said simply. "I want you to make the mortgage payment so we don't lose the house, and I want us to find a way back to being a family." The request was both heartbreaking and infuriating. Even in apology, even in acknowledgement of their mistakes, he was asking me to rescue them from consequences they had created through their own choices. And what are you offering in return? The question hung between us, forcing him to articulate what he was willing to give rather than simply what he needed to receive. "I don't know," he said finally. "What do you want?" What did I want? Respect, certainly. Appreciation for my contributions. Inclusion in family decisions that affected me. Basic consideration for my feelings and dignity. But beyond those immediate needs, what did I want from a relationship that had become so damaged by exploitation and indifference? "I want you to learn to solve your own problems," I said finally. "I want you to understand that independence means taking responsibility for your choices. I want you to appreciate what you have instead of taking it for granted. But if you don't help us now, we're going to lose everything we've worked for." The irony was profound. They would lose everything I had worked for, everything my contributions had made possible. Their sweat equity in the relationship had been minimal compared to my financial investment. "Marcus, you're asking me to prevent you from experiencing the consequences of your own financial decisions. How does that teach you anything about responsibility or independence?" "It doesn't," he admitted. "But Mom, Sophie doesn't deserve to suffer because her parents made stupid mistakes." Sophie, the innocent victim whose welfare could be used to justify continued enabling of her parents' poor decisions. The emotional leverage that made it impossible to maintain strategic distance from their crisis. "You're right," I said slowly. "Sophie doesn't deserve this, but that's your responsibility to fix, not mine." The conversation continued for 2 hours, circling through apologies, justifications, desperate appeals, and emotional manipulation. Marcus tried every argument he could formulate, but I held firm to my basic position. They had created this crisis through their own choices, and they needed to solve it through their own efforts rather than continued dependence on my financial resources. When he finally left, exhausted and defeated, I sat alone in my apartment feeling the weight of decisions that would reshape all of our lives. In 3 weeks, Marcus and Brianna would face foreclosure if they couldn't find solutions to their financial crisis. In 3 weeks, I would discover whether my strategic campaign had taught them anything about respect and responsibility, or whether it had simply destroyed whatever remained of our family relationships. The old Marine had launched her offensive, successfully, but the final battle was yet to come. The resolution came not through surrender or victory, but through an unexpected phone call that changed everything. It was Sophie who called me directly, having somehow gotten hold of her mother's phone while her parents were in another desperate financial planning session with their bank representative. "Grandma Kay," her small voice trembled through the phone. "I heard Mommy and Daddy talking. They said you're not family anymore because of the house money. But I still love you, and I think you're still my grandma even if you're mad at them." The innocent wisdom of a 7-year-old cut through months of adult complications with surgical precision. Sophie didn't understand mortgage payments or financial independence or strategic warfare between adults. She understood love, loyalty, and the simple truth that family relationships shouldn't be contingent on money. "Sweetheart," I said gently, "I'll always be your grandma, no matter what happens with the grown-up problems." "Then why don't you come to Christmas anymore?" "Mommy said you were too busy, but I think you're just sad about sleeping in the garage." I told her the garage was a stupid place for grandmas to sleep, out of the mouths of babes. Sophie had identified the core issue more clearly than any of us adults. Treating family members with dignity wasn't negotiable, regardless of financial circumstances. That conversation crystallized something that had been building in my mind for days. This wasn't really about money or mortgages or teaching lessons about independence. This was about family relationships that had become transactional rather than genuine. And my campaign to restore balance had created its own form of transaction. Respect in exchange for financial support. I called Sarah Walsh that afternoon with a new strategy. "I want to make them an offer," I told my attorney. "Not an ultimatum, not a punishment, but a genuine opportunity for them to choose what kind of family we're going to be." 2 hours later, I was back at Marcus and Brianna's house, but this time, I came through the front door as an invited guest rather than a refugee seeking accommodation. The living room where we gathered felt different, less comfortable, more desperate, as if the financial pressure had changed the very atmosphere of their suburban dream. Sophie launched herself into my arms the moment I entered, her enthusiastic greeting a stark contrast to her parents' cautious expressions. Marcus looked exhausted, while Brianna appeared to be calculating angles and strategies even as she offered polite greetings. "I have a proposal," I announced once we were seated. "Not a rescue, not continued dependence, but a business arrangement that might benefit all of us." I placed the legal documents Sarah had prepared on their coffee table, the same coffee table my down payment had helped them purchase months earlier. "I'm prepared to assume full ownership of this house by taking over the mortgage completely. You would become my tenants, paying market rate rent that covers the mortgage payment plus a small profit margin for me as landlord." The silence was profound as they processed this unexpected option. "Market rate rent in this neighborhood is approximately $2,400 monthly," I continued. "Your current mortgage obligation is $2,800. As my tenants, you'd save $400 monthly while I cover the full mortgage payment and assume all ownership responsibilities. Brianna was the first to respond, her clinical mind immediately analyzing the financial implications. What about equity? We'd be paying rent instead of building ownership in the property. You'd be paying $400 less than your current obligation, while living in a house you can actually afford, I replied. Plus, you'd have a landlord who understands military families and won't raise your rent arbitrarily or evict you for minor issues. Marcus looked between his wife and me, clearly torn between pride and practicality. Mom, this feels like charity. With extra steps. It's not charity, I said firmly. It's a business arrangement that acknowledges reality. You can't afford this house on your current income. I can afford to own it as rental property. Sophie gets to stay in her school district. You get affordable housing, and I get rental income plus property appreciation. The logic was sound, but the emotional implications were complex. They would be acknowledging their inability to maintain the lifestyle they had assumed, while I would be establishing myself as their landlord rather than their financial benefactor. What about our relationship? Marcus asked quietly. How do we go back to being family after everything that's happened? The question went to the heart of what this conflict had really been about. Money had been the weapon, but respect had been the battlefield. We start by being honest about what we can offer each other, I said. I can offer you affordable housing and grandmother love for Sophie. You can offer me reliable tenants and the chance to be part of Sophie's life as she grows up. And if we don't want to be your tenants? Brianna asked, her voice carrying echoes of the territorial hostility that had started this whole conflict. Then you find housing you can afford independently, and we try to rebuild our family relationship without the complications of financial entanglement, I replied calmly. But you should know that if you reject this offer, I'll be exercising my cosigner rights to take possession of the property anyway. The foreclosure timeline doesn't stop because we're family. The stark choice was laid out clearly: accept the rental arrangement and maintain some form of family connection, or face eviction and potential homelessness while I still acquired the property they could no longer afford. Sophie, who had been listening with the intense concentration children bring to conversations they sense are important, suddenly spoke up. Can Grandma Kay have the big bedroom upstairs if she owns the house? Then she won't have to sleep in the garage anymore. The innocent suggestion carried profound implications. If I became their landlord, what would be the boundaries of our cohabitation? Would I live separately, or would this arrangement create new opportunities for genuine family connection? Actually, I said slowly, an idea forming as I spoke, I've been thinking about selling my apartment in Colorado Springs. If you're comfortable with the arrangement, I could take the master bedroom and we could share the house as multi-generational family. The proposal surprised everyone, including myself. But as I said it, it felt right in a way that months of financial maneuvering and strategic warfare never had. You'd want to live here? After everything? Marcus asked, genuine surprise in his voice. I'd want to live with my family, I corrected, but as an equal partner in household decisions, not as someone whose presence is merely tolerated while her money is appreciated. Brianna's expression was unreadable as she processed this unexpected development. Living with her mother-in-law permanently was clearly not what she had envisioned when they first bought their dream house. What would that look like practically? She asked. It would look like respect, I said simply. Mutual consideration for each other's needs, shared responsibilities for household management, and recognition that Sophie benefits from having multiple adults who love her involved in her daily life. Over the next 2 hours, we negotiated the details of an arrangement none of us had anticipated when this conflict began. The rental agreement would be standard and professional, protecting everyone's interests legally. The household arrangement would be based on mutual respect and shared decision-making, with clear boundaries and expectations. Most importantly, we established that love and money were separate currencies that couldn't be exchanged for each other. Marcus and Brianna signed the rental agreement on December 23rd, just 2 days before Christmas and 1 day before foreclosure proceedings would have begun. The timing felt symbolic. We were choosing family connection over financial pride, practical solutions over stubborn positions. Christmas morning in our shared house felt different from any holiday we had celebrated together. There was an honesty in our interactions that hadn't existed before, an acknowledgement of what we each brought to the relationship and what we each needed from it. Sophie, of course, was delighted to have her grandmother living in the same house, available for bedtime stories and morning pancakes without the complicated dynamics that had marked my previous stay. As I watched my granddaughter open presents under a tree that stood in a house I now owned but we all shared, I reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought us to this point. I had set out to teach lessons about respect and appreciation, but I had learned equally valuable lessons about the difference between enabling and supporting, between being needed and being valued. The old Marine had won her campaign, but the victory looked nothing like what I had originally envisioned. Sometimes the best battles end not with surrender or conquest, but with transformation that benefits everyone involved. Family relationships, like military strategies, require constant adaptation to changing circumstances. The key is never forgetting that the ultimate objective isn't winning. It's creating conditions where everyone can thrive with dignity and respect. If you've made it this far in our story, thank you for joining us on this journey of family, forgiveness, and finding strength in unexpected places. These stories of resilience and transformation happen every day, and sharing them helps us all remember that it's never too late to stand up for our own worth. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories of people who found the courage to change their circumstances and reclaim their dignity. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an update, and let us know in the comments what family challenges you've overcome in your own life. Remember, you're stronger than you think, more valuable than others might recognize, and deserving of respect no matter what your age or circumstances. Sometimes we just need to remind the world of who we really are. Until next time, keep fighting the good fight.